I was standing at the kitchen counter, wiping frosting off my hands, when my phone buzzed. It was late afternoon. The apartment smelled like vanilla cake and the faint bite of disinfectant from the rink bag by the door. My son was in the living room, sitting cross-legged on the floor, carefully lining up toy cars while the balloons drifted against the ceiling. The text was from my mother. No greeting, no mention of the party, just a number. She wrote that everyone attending my younger brother's wedding would need to contribute $1,800 per person. Hotel, venue, family expectations. That was the phrase she used. I read it once, then again, I didn't reply. Earlier that day, I had been checking the clock every few minutes at the ice rink. The air inside was sharp and cold, echoing with the scrape of skates and kids laughing too loudly. I had booked the party weeks in advance, sent reminders, followed up. My parents said they'd be there. My brother said he'd try, none of them showed, no call, no delay, nothing. At one point, my son skated over and pressed his helmet gently into my side. He looked up at me and said it was okay if it was just us. He said it like he meant to protect me from something. I nodded, smiled, kept my voice even. We sang anyway. Back home, after I read my mother's message, I folded the phone face down on the counter. I stared at the cake. The candles had burned unevenly, wax pooled and hardened. I felt tired in a quiet way, like something had finally finished running. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I took an envelope from the drawer. I put a single dollar inside. On a scrap of paper, I wrote that we wouldn't be attending. No punctuation, no extra words. I sealed it, slipped on my coat, and walked down to the mailbox at the corner. The metal door clanged shut louder than I expected. 2 days later, while I was helping my son with his shoes before school, there was a knock at the door. Not rushed, not soft either. When I opened it, a police officer was standing there. My father was beside him, arms crossed, eyes fixed past me like he was already somewhere else. The officer held an envelope in his hand. I remember noticing how quiet the hallway was. No traffic, no voices, just the hum of the building and my son tugging lightly at my sleeve behind me. That was when I knew the dollar hadn't ended anything. It had started something. I closed the door after they left and leaned my forehead against the wood. Then I stood up straight, picked up my phone, and began pulling old messages from the cloud, slowly, in order. Then I waited. I grew up believing I was the reliable one, not the impressive one, not the celebrated one, just the person who handled things quietly so no one else had to. We lived just outside the city, in a narrow brick house where the heat always clicked too loud in winter and the hallway light flickered if you didn't twist the switch just right. My parents liked order, schedules, appearances, and from early on, my role was to make sure none of that cracked. My brother, Evan, was different. He moved through rooms like he expected space to open for him. Doors did. Conversations followed him. My parents adjusted their tone when he spoke, leaning in without realizing they were doing it. I don't remember a single moment when this started. It was more like weather, always there. When it came time for college, the difference sharpened. Evan's acceptance letters were framed. His tuition was discussed in full sentences, with spreadsheets and long conversations at the dining table. When I mentioned community college, my mother nodded once and said we'd figure it out later. Later never came. I worked evenings at a grocery store, then mornings at a cafe. I studied when I could. I learned early how to stay quiet about being tired. My father would glance up from the paper and say things like, "That's just how families work." Whenever I tried to explain that things felt uneven, no one argued with him. So neither did I. Years passed that way. I moved into a small apartment closer to the city and started piecing together a life that didn't require asking permission. I taught myself skills online. Nights were for learning. Days were for work. When my son was born, the pattern didn't break. It hardened. My parents liked him, in the abstract. Photos, holiday visits, cards signed with careful handwriting, but they rarely showed up when it required effort. School events were too busy. Birthdays were bad timing. There was always something involving Evan, a trip, a launch, a dinner that couldn't be moved. At family gatherings, I noticed how conversations bent. My mother's chair angled toward my brother. My father's questions aimed at his plans. I cleared plates, refreshed drinks, smiled when someone remembered to ask how work was going. Once, when my laptop finally gave out, I asked if they could help me replace it. My mother sighed and said they had just helped Evan with a down payment. She suggested I look for something refurbished. I did. The strange part was how long I accepted it. I told myself it didn't matter, that independence was better anyway, that my son wouldn't notice the gaps. But children notice patterns adults pretend aren't there. The day they missed his birthday wasn't loud, it didn't explode, it simply landed, quiet, final. When I mailed that dollar, it wasn't anger, it was clarity. And standing in the hallway with a police officer holding that envelope, I realized something else too. My parents didn't see boundaries as boundaries, they saw them as challenges. That night, after my son fell asleep, I opened my laptop and started organizing old emails, bank transfers, event requests, anything that mentioned money or expectations. I didn't know what I was looking for yet. I just knew I needed things in order. The cursor blinked on the screen. Outside, a train passed somewhere in the distance. I kept scrolling. By the time midnight passed, the apartment was silent in a way that felt earned. The refrigerator hummed. A streetlight outside the window blinked once, then steadied. I sat at the small desk by the window with my laptop open, folders spreading across the screen like a map I hadn't realized I'd been drawing for years. I wasn't angry. That surprised me. I moved slowly, naming files by date, screenshots of messages asking me to help out just this once, emails that referenced shared costs but never included totals, calendar invites I had accepted without question. I didn't react to any of it, I just kept sorting. Somewhere around 1 a.m, I noticed a pattern, every request tied back to Evan, his events, his plans, his timelines, and almost every message ended the same way, assumed compliance. No discussion, no follow-up, just certainty. I pulled bank statements next, not theirs, mine. There it was. A steady leak over years, small amounts, large ones, always framed as temporary, always unresolved. I had never added them up before. When I did, I stopped typing for a moment and leaned back in my chair. I hadn't been careless. I had been managed. The next day, after I dropped my son at school, I didn't go straight to work. I sat in my car for a few minutes with the engine off, watching parents walk their kids to the doors. Backpacks bounced, shoes scraped the pavement, life moving forward without commentary. I made one call. My aunt lived on the north side, in a quiet condo filled with plants she somehow kept alive year-round. She had always been observant in a way that didn't demand attention. At family dinners, she listened more than she spoke. When she did speak, people adjusted. She answered on the second ring. I didn't explain everything. I didn't need to. I told her about the dollar, about the police visit, about the wedding demand. There was a pause on the line. Not shock, just confirmation. She said she had wondered when things would surface. That afternoon, she forwarded me files, old emails she'd saved, notes she kept when something felt off, vendor names, dates, numbers that didn't quite match. She hadn't accused anyone, she had simply archived. That was the shift. For the first time, I wasn't reacting to something happening to me. I was looking at a system, one built slowly, deliberately, and quietly, and systems leave records. I created a new folder and labeled it clearly. I added nothing emotional, no commentary, just documents. Step 1 was silence. I didn't respond to messages. I didn't warn anyone. I let them assume I was confused or intimidated. That assumption gave me space. Step 2 was verification. I checked public records, cross-referenced vendor business registrations, compared invoices against dates and services listed. I didn't rush. Accuracy mattered more than speed. Step 3 was containment. I updated school pickup permissions, changed privacy settings, documented every contact attempt, time, date, method, no interpretation. By the end of the week, my dining table was covered in neatly stacked papers. My son did his homework at the other end, humming softly to himself, unaware that anything had changed. But it had. When another message came in, this one sharper, more urgent, I didn't open it right away. I let it sit on the screen while I finished labeling a file. Then I locked the laptop. I wasn't ready to respond yet, I was ready to proceed, and I knew the next step wouldn't stay private for long. I stopped thinking in terms of feelings and started thinking in terms of sequence. That was the difference. I wrote everything down in a notebook I kept in the kitchen drawer, not a journal, a list, dates on the left, actions on the right, no adjectives, no conclusions. Step 1 was already done, limit access. Step 2 followed naturally, create witnesses. I scheduled a meeting at my son's school. Nothing dramatic, just an update. I brought copies of the custody documents, the emergency contact changes, and a brief written note stating that no one else was authorized for pickup. The administrator read it carefully, nodded once, and added it to the file. Procedure mattered there. I respected that. Then I waited. The next contact came sooner than I expected. It was mid-afternoon when the school called. The tone was professional but tight. A woman claiming to be my son's grandmother had arrived, insisting there had been a misunderstanding. She was calm, they said, persistent. I left work without comment and drove straight there. By the time I arrived, my mother was standing near the front office, posture rigid, voice measured. She stopped when she saw me, as if this were a meeting she had planned. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I told the administrator that no consent had been given and asked that the policy be followed. They escorted her out. She didn't look back at me. That evening, my phone rang from an unfamiliar number. I answered without thinking. My mother's voice came through, steady and controlled. She spoke to my son first, asking questions that weren't really questions, framing things, suggesting things. I took the phone and ended the call. After that, there were messages, more urgent now, less polished. I saved everyone. That night, I contacted an attorney recommended through work. I didn't tell a story. I sent a folder. The response came the next morning. Short, direct, sufficient. There was enough to move forward. The escalation wasn't loud. It was administrative. A formal letter went out. Boundaries outlined. Contact prohibited except through counsel. Consequences defined in clear language. No threats. Just process. I didn't send it myself. That mattered. The wedding date got closer. Messages from extended family started appearing, confused, tentative. I didn't reply. I didn't correct them. Silence kept my position neutral while facts did their work elsewhere. My aunt continued quietly, pulling threads I hadn't known existed, invoices that didn't match services, deposits routed through unfamiliar accounts, emails that assumed no one would ever read closely. When I laid everything out in order, it was simple. Not emotional, not personal, just numbers that refused to line up. The night before the next scheduled legal step, I cleaned the apartment, wiped the counters, set out clothes for the morning, packed my son's lunch. When I went to bed, my phone was face down on the nightstand. I slept. The next phase would happen in daylight, with other people present and rules everyone had to follow. The confrontation didn't happen at home. It didn't happen over the phone. It happened in a place where voices stay low and records stay permanent. The conference room was smaller than I expected. Neutral walls, a long table with a faint scratch down the center. I arrived early, set my folder down, and waited. When they walked in, my parents didn't look at me right away. My mother adjusted her bag. My father sat stiffly, hands folded like he was waiting to be told where to sign. My brother wasn't there. That detail mattered more than anything else. I didn't speak first. I let the attorney explain the purpose of the meeting. Clear language, no accusations, just a summary of documented concerns and the request for clarification. When my mother finally spoke, her voice was controlled, almost pleasant. She said there had been misunderstandings, that family finances were complicated, that I had always been sensitive about money. I didn't respond. Instead, the attorney slid the first document across the table, then the second, then the third. Each one dated, each one verified. Vendor invoices next to bank transfers, amounts circled, accounts highlighted. The room got quieter. My father shifted in his chair. He cleared his throat once, but didn't say anything. My mother's expression changed in small increments, tightening around the eyes, then flattening completely. When she tried to redirect, the attorney stopped her, calmly, politely. He pointed back to the numbers, asked for explanations that fit the records. None came. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't list grievances. I defined reality once in a single sentence and then stayed silent. I said that contact with my son was no longer acceptable outside legal boundaries, that any further attempts would be documented, that I would not discuss this privately. My mother reacted emotionally. That was expected. My father looked down at the table, as if the scratch in the wood had suddenly become interesting. The meeting ended without resolution. That was fine. As we stood to leave, my brother's absence became loud. It told me more than anything he could have said. I walked out first. In the hallway, my phone buzzed. A message came through from an unknown address. Short, unpolished. Attached were emails I hadn't seen before. Internal threads, instructions written plainly. They confirmed everything. I saved them, forwarded them, and then I put the phone away. The confrontation was over. What followed would be decided by timelines, filings, and people who had no emotional investment at all. That was exactly how I wanted it. The resolution didn't arrive all at once. It came in steps, each one smaller than people expect, but heavier. The first was paperwork. The additional emails my brother sent were verified within a day. Headers checked, dates matched. Instructions were clear enough that no interpretation was required. Funds had been redirected. Costs had been inflated. Names had been used casually, as if no one would ever slow down enough to notice. Someone did. The second step was third-party confirmation. Vendors were contacted formally, not accused, just asked to confirm services rendered against payments received. 2 responded immediately, 1 asked for time, none denied the discrepancies, 1 admitted, quietly, that the instructions had come directly from my mother and that it wasn't his place to ask questions. That phrase appeared more than once. The legal process moved forward without urgency or drama. Motions filed, responses requested, deadlines set. My involvement was minimal. I answered questions, provided documents, then stepped back. The court did the rest. The temporary order came first. No contact, no indirect communication, no exceptions. It was framed as precautionary, not punitive. That mattered. It set the tone. The wedding unraveled quietly. The venue cited contractual issues. A vendor withdrew. Another demanded payment clarification. Guests began hearing fragments of explanations that didn't line up. No announcement was made. There didn't need to be one. When the article ran, it didn't mention me by name. It didn't need to. It focused on numbers, public filings, and the pattern itself. The tone was factual, almost dull. That made it believable. After that, things accelerated. My parents' responses became scattered. Online posts appeared, then disappeared. Messages arrived through extended family, asking if I would just make this go away. I didn't respond. The attorney handled everything. The final hearing was brief. The judge reviewed the material without commentary, asked a few questions, issued a permanent order restricting contact with me and my son. The reasoning was stated plainly. Repeated boundary violations, documented harassment, and financial misconduct. No one argued. When it was over, my mother stood abruptly and left the room. My father followed a few steps behind her. They didn't look back. Outside, the air felt cooler than I expected. I stood on the steps for a moment, not doing anything in particular, just letting the absence settle. At home that evening, my son sat at the table coloring while I sorted mail. He asked if we were still going to the park the next day. I told him yes, that was the most important outcome. The noise faded faster than I thought it would. Online attention moved on, conversations ended, invitations stopped arriving. What remained was quiet, not the empty kind, the kind that holds. I put the documents into storage, labeled clearly, and placed them on a high shelf. Then I made dinner, set the table, and turned off my phone for the night. The process was finished. What came next would be simpler. Life settled into a quieter pattern after that. Mornings became predictable again. Coffee brewing while the apartment was still dim. My son eating cereal at the counter, telling me small, serious stories about his day ahead. I walked him to school when I could. Other days, we waved from the door. The routine held. At work, I focused on what was in front of me. Meetings, code reviews, mentoring junior engineers who reminded me of myself years earlier. Quiet, capable, unsure when to speak. I made a point to listen carefully. Structure matters when people are finding their footing. Evenings were simple. Homework at the table, dishes drying in the rack. Sometimes we walked a few blocks just to get air, hands tucked into our pockets when the wind came off the lake. No interruptions, no sudden calls. The restraining order stayed in place, no violations, no attempts to test it. The distance did what distance is supposed to do. It reduced noise, not memory. That was fine. I wasn't trying to erase the past, just contain it. My aunt and I met occasionally for coffee. She never asked for updates unless I offered them. One afternoon, as we watched people pass by the window, she said something simple. That systems only work when someone finally documents the truth. I nodded. It felt accurate. My son stopped asking about his grandparents, not all at once, gradually. His world filled with school projects, weekend games, questions about how things work. That told me everything I needed to know. One evening, while organizing a drawer, I found the old notebook, the one with dates and steps. I flipped through it once, then recycled it. I didn't need it anymore. The structure was internal now. Peace, I learned, isn't dramatic. It's orderly. It's knowing who has access and who doesn't. It's choosing silence when silence protects. Every so often, someone reaches out privately, a coworker, an acquaintance, someone dealing with a similar situation, unsure whether what they're experiencing is normal. I don't give advice unless asked. I mostly listen. Sometimes that's enough. If you're still here, thanks for spending this time with me. If this story resonated, take a moment to like and subscribe. It helps this space stay calm and grounded. Let me know in the comments which city you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. I read them. 2 more stories will be up next. Different people, different situations, same quiet focus on clarity and boundaries. Until then, take care of what matters most.